Hi, and welcome to part 2 of our 6-part series focused on special education IEP training hosted by the Westside Family Resource and Empowerment Center. So this particular video is going to focus on understanding assessments. So a key part of understanding assessments is requesting an IEP. So when you're requesting an IEP, you typically do so when your child has consistently demonstrated significant challenges performing on grade level. And this could be academically or socializing with grade level peers. So what does this look like? This can look like difficulties with speech and language, low grades or low test scores. They may have challenges meeting behavior expectations either in the classroom, on the yard, in social settings. They may also have difficulty remembering information, sustaining attention, paying attention just generally to information that's being presented to them in the classroom, as well as trouble following directions. So if you have consistently seen these behaviors demonstrated by your child, you may see this as an opportunity to request an assessment. So how would you do that? So first, it may be beneficial to ask your child's teacher, who can you communicate your concerns to? And depending on the school that you're at, it may be the school psychologist, it may be the special education administrator. So really wanting to think about who you will have this conversation with, and be working with moving forward. But also, you really want to make sure that you put your concerns in writing. So you want to write a letter. And include in the letter, make sure that you have the date, make sure that you have your name, your child's name, and your concerns related to your child, whether that be their behavior or, again, their academic concerns. And be really specific about why you're requesting an evaluation. And so once you've written that letter, you want to make sure that you provide it to a member of the school team. So if you're dropping it off at school and you're providing it to someone in the office, really wanting to follow up to make sure that, again, the school psychologist, the special education administrator, someone that will be directly involved with the special education evaluation process has actually received your child's letter. So it may be helpful to kind of have a follow-up conversation or phone call just to make sure that the letter gets into the right hands. And then once you have written the letter and provided your written request for an IEP, the school team has 15 days to respond to their request. So within 15 days, you should receive an assessment plan that kind of outlines what the process will be like for your child to receive an evaluation. If you do not hear from your school team within 15 days, you can follow up with your school team, again, indicating the date. So it may be helpful for you to take notes somewhere on your phone, in your calendar, the date that you provided the letter to the school team. And again, it's 15 calendar days. So 15 days for the school team to provide this to you with an assessment plan. So another way that your child may also be referred for a special education evaluation is through the student support and progress team referrals or in child find. So essentially, schools have to demonstrate efforts to provide intervention and also monitor your child's response to that intervention in the general education classroom before they refer your child for special education. So this may be an opportunity to have conversation with your child's teacher, with the school psychologist if they're a member of the student support and progress team. Oftentimes, the resource specialist is also a member of this team, and you create goals based on your child's unique needs and say, okay, these are the ways that as a team we're going to support your child with these goals. However, if there's not progress towards those goals and your child has difficulty meeting those goals, and that often is when the child is referred for special education evaluation. And who has the opportunity internally, so within the school, to refer for special education? So sometimes that may be the classroom teacher, again, a member of the student support and progress team, or the school administrator. And so thinking more about the assessment plan. So the assessment plan really outlines the evaluation process that will take place for your child. And so there are a variety of areas in which your child will be evaluated. So just general ability, so really understanding their cognitive ability. So this has to do a lot with their attention. It has to do with their ability to listen to information, remember information. So just some of their general abilities. As well as their health, if that is a factor, if that is an area of consideration. Their academic performance, so really looking at their academic performance relative to their grade level peers. So are they performing below grade level? Where are they performing relative to those peers? If motor skills was an area of concern, so if they have gross motor concerns, or fine motor concerns. So again, what that is relative to their grade level peers, as well as speech and language. And while there are a variety of different specialists that may conduct assessment, the assessments typically tend to occur within two buckets. So standardized assessments and alternative assessments, and these are really based on the unique needs of your child. And so that will help us to determine, what services and supports your child may need. In the assessment plan, typically eligibilities that are being considered are not included, with the exception of one. And the exception is emotional disturbance. And that really is just to make sure that families have a little bit of a heads up that might be a consideration. And that will be more of a conversation for the IEP meetings, and it gives families an opportunity to really research that more, given that, that there's going to be an extensive assessment. Not to say that that automatically means the child is eligible as a child with an emotional disturbance, but again, just that this is something that is going to be considered by the school team. One of the most critical aspects of the assessment plan is parent consent. So the assessment cannot proceed without your consent. Your consent is the most critical piece of the assessment plan. So again, once you write the letter, or once you are made aware that your child has been referred for special education evaluation and you receive your assessment plan, again, the assessment plan outlines all the different areas that your child will be evaluated in based on either your concerns or the concerns of the school team, the type of assessments that your child will be evaluated with. At the bottom of the assessment plan is an opportunity for you to sign saying that you provide consent that your child will then begin to engage in the evaluations necessary. And so once the assessment plan is signed, that's when the school team has kind of the green light to begin the evaluation process. And they have 60 days to complete the evaluation. So you providing your consent and your signature is a key piece of allowing the evaluation process to move forward. So how is an assessment conducted? So there are three kind of big buckets in which we collect data for an assessment. So the first is background information. And in terms of health history, this may include conditions at birth, include allergies, hospitalizations or accidents, medical diagnoses, and then looking at developmental milestones. It really details which your child did or did not meet based on the norms for same age children. So for example, it might be looking at what age they were when they began crawling, walking, when they said their first words, their ability to go to the bathroom by themselves. So really looking at that and comparing it to other children and the norms for other children their age. In terms of family history, so really wanting to understand the structure of your family, what languages are spoken in the home, and the family health history. Background information also includes outside assessments. So if there have been any independent evaluations or evaluations that have been conducted by medical providers that are related to special education eligibilities. And then educational history. So this can include academic grades and cooperation marks. So a lot of times it'll include the report cards from all the years prior to the current academic year. So if you have a little one, they probably won't have a whole lot of educational history because they haven't been in a formal school setting previously. It includes a review of cumulative records, and so this provides insight into attendance. And so oftentimes attendance is a huge factor in special education assessments, because if the student has had poor attendance where they've missed a significant amount of days in the school year, so that may impact that might be a factor in impacting how they navigate the general education environment. And so that may sometimes, there have been cases where that has resulted in the child no longer being able to be assessed for an evaluation because their attendance was considered to be a significant factor. And so by looking at the cumulative records, you're able to determine whether or not attendance is a factor or it truly is one of the eligibilities that may be impacting the child's ability to perform academically or socially. Looking at standardized and classroom assessment scores, so the annual test scores or state testing if your child has received them, classroom assessments, so looking at that across the different subject matters. Again, really trying to rule out attendance as factor, as I mentioned, and then looking at areas of strength. So wanting to make sure that we see that your child has areas, what those areas of strength are, how we can leverage those areas of strength, and what those opportunities for growth may be for your child. So special education history, this is really if it applies for your child. So again, if you have a little one and this is their first school setting, they may not have special education history. And also, if this is their initial assessment, they won't have that. But if this is the triennial assessment or other assessments, they will have a special education history. So this is really a summary of those previous evaluations. It provides a description of the services your child has received, what their eligibility was when they were receiving those services, and the goals and their progress towards the goals, and just their overall progress as a result of them receiving special education services. So another key aspect of the assessment is interviews. And one of the interviews that is really critical is interview with you, the parent or guardian. And so this provides a lens into the child's behavior at home, how they interact with you, how they interact with siblings if they have any, how they interact with friends. So if they interact with friends at a park, in the neighborhood, or any kind of extracurricular activities, so what those interactions look like, how they respond to directions in those settings. So how do they respond to directions from you as their parents or family members, and any concerns that you may have related to academics or behavior. So if you, as you do homework with your child or engage in, academic interaction with your child at home, what does that look like, or dedicated focus on academics, and so really wanting to have a lens into how your child behaves in the home setting. Another interview that happens is with the teacher, and so this is looking at behavior in the classroom. So are they able to follow directions? Again, what are those academic skills that really demonstrate areas of strength? Where are they having a hard time? What are some of their challenges? And looking at how they engage, their teachers' observations of how they engage in the yard, how they're engaging with their peers. And so really pulling together any concerns that they have, again, related to academics or behavior. And then the last is typically as the student gets older and if it's developmentally appropriate, but really wanting to understand from the student themselves or from your child themselves, what are these activities that your child really likes to do? We want to get to know your little one outside of just this information and the data. We want to get to know them and really see them, and as they are a critical part of the evaluation as well. And so what are the academic activities that they feel like they do really well or they really enjoy doing? What are the activities that they have a hard time with? What are the things they enjoy doing with their friends? Who are the friends that they enjoy spending time with? How do they perceive their relationship with their family? So really wanting to understand their perception of their school and home environment. And the last is observations. And so there are typically two observations that occur. The first is a structured observation. This occurs during a core academic lesson. So typically during reading or math. So really seeing how they're able to complete an assignment, how they engage, are they raising their hand, are they able to pay attention? So what does it look like when they're in a formal classroom setting? And then unstructured is more during some of the times when they're interacting with peers, either during recess or nutrition or lunch. So how are they engaging when they are not in a classroom? The next piece of the assessment is really the evaluation analysis. And so the assessment environment is a huge way that we look at provide a comprehensive lens of your child, because it's a way to observe how the child responds in a testing environment with a one-on-one adult interaction. And so with this, there's also a validity statement that really indicates whether the test results are a valid representation of your child's abilities. And so sometimes there may be instances where the child is really uncomfortable in these situations, or they had a hard time completing tasks and assignments, and so there might be an underrepresentation of your child's abilities, or we weren't able to get through as much because your child demonstrated significant behaviors that are unique to the child that we have not seen in the classroom. And so really wanting to make sure that what we're seeing in the testing environment reflects as closely as possible to some of the behaviors that we've seen and heard from the teacher, from you as the parent or guardian. So if it's completely unique and seems different than what we're seeing and hearing, then we want to make sure that we're taking note of that. And then standardized tests. And so this is really dependent on the unique needs of your child. So psychological assessments will pretty much happen across the board, but speech, OT, APE, and APE being adaptive physical education, OT being occupational therapy, assistive technology, a functional behavior assessment. So those are really dependent on the concerns that were outlined either by you as a parent or by the school team. But the psychological assessment and the academic assessments will pretty much happen in every single special education evaluation. The others are more dependent on the needs of your child that have been identified. And so in a psychological assessment, there are several different buckets and categories with which your child is being evaluated. So the first is cognitive ability. So in the cognitive ability, so looking at the psychological assessment specifically, there are four different buckets that typically are evaluated for your child. So the first being cognitive abilities, and that really just looks at overall cognition. So this includes auditory, sensory motor, visual, attention, phonological, and then not listed here is association, expression, and conceptualization. So really determining if your child has processing disorders and whether or not those may be impacting their academic performance. Also, you will receive, and sometimes depending on the age and developmental ability of your child, social emotional rating scales, and those you will always receive a broadband. So an example of a broadband assessment is the BASC, and a narrowband. And the narrowband is really specific to the unique needs of your child. So for example, if you receive the Connors 3, the Connors 3 is if you have indicated that your child has difficulty sustaining attention, or they have impulsivity or hyperactivity concerns. So that may be, that particular narrowband looks at behaviors associated with attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And there are also narrow bands specifically looking at anxiety, so the multidimensional anxiety scale for children 2, or the MASC 2, as well as autism. So there's the Autism Spectrum Rating Scale, or the ASRS. So again, the narrow band is more specific to the unique needs of the child, where the broad band is pretty standard for every psychological assessment. Depending on the needs, or actually going back to the social emotional rating scales, so looking at the rating scales are provided to you as the parent or guardian. They're also provided to the teachers that support your teacher or teachers that support your child. And again, depending on the age and developmental ability of your child, your child. And so really wanting to see the similarity between all of those different individuals, and to determine the consistency in behavior across settings. So if behavior is only happening at school and not happening at home, then that is one type of consideration, but really looking to see if the behavior is happening across all settings for the child. And then depending on the concerns that are outlined for your child, adaptive living skills, there will also be a portion of the evaluation dedicated to that, and really looking at their ability to navigate and complete daily living. And so an example of the assessment that may be provided is the adaptive behavior assessment system, and that's if they're able to tie their shoes, if they're able to go to the restroom on their own, if they're able, and there are also sometimes elements of like speech and language that are included in that as well. But really seeing how they're able to conduct skills that are associated with navigating the school environment, the home environment, or just the general environments that your child has access to. And the assessment will also include summaries from the nurse, so a health assessment. They will also include academic assessment. Typically, this is done by the resource specialist. Speech and language, if that, again, was an area of, as either to rule out that there are no speech and language concerns. So that would typically be by the school psychologist. But if there are significant speech and language concerns, then this particular section will be done by the speech and language pathologist. And then any other assessments that are provided by service providers based on the needs and concerns that are outlined in the assessment plan. So eligibility recommendations. So really looking at a comprehensive review of all the data that was just previously mentioned, and understanding that no single test or no single score determines eligibility. So how your child performs on the phonological assessments in the psychoeducational evaluation is not going to determine whether or not your child has specific eligibility. So it really is looking at all the data sources, the interviews, the observations, the background data, the outcomes of those evaluations to help to recommend eligibilities. And again, these are recommendations, not determinations. So in the IEP meeting, the IEP team will discuss the recommendations that are provided by the school psychologist, and as a team will determine what eligibility best suits the child based on the data, based on the child's needs. But the school psychologists themselves, the individuals that complete, the service providers that are completing the assessments, are not making determinations for the eligibility. that is decided by the IEP team, which you as a parent or guardian are a part of. And just to kind of get a sense of the most frequent eligibilities that are seen in the school setting. So frequently the high incidence eligibilities are autism, specific learning disability, intellectual disability, emotional disturbance, and other health impairment with ADHD characteristics.